Hello, I'm Dr. Bruce Teague of the EWU Center for Entrepreneurship, and this is Startup Stories, where we examine the entrepreneurial journey through the startup stories of local Spokane startups. Today, we're going to end up looking at two common issues that aspiring entrepreneurs or current entrepreneurs face. One of them is the importance of customer needs in guiding the startup, and another is the transition, the generational transition in family business. I am fortunate to be joined today by Steve Wilson, CEO of Ptera. And so Ptera was started by Steve's father, James. And so Steve brings a variety of perspectives to the startup story. He was a part of the business as it started up. He is familially related, of course, and now has taken over and leads the company. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So a lot of people may know the name and not entirely know what Ptera is. So can we start out by, can you tell a little bit about what Ptera is?
Sure, yeah. So we still have a lot of mispronunciations of the name, and that kind of just comes with picking a strange name, I guess. But so technically, there were three companies that all started right around the same time, all need-based and interest-based, given what my dad was dealing with at the time. So he actually was brought up here after a venture capital funded startup down in Silicon Valley. So he had a couple patents in video compression down there. This is after he left Pixar. So he had a varied past in startups, and he ended up starting this business that was venture funded, gave up too much control, was forced out, and came up here actually to help start the first gigabit Ethernet company, which was Packet Engines. That was a well-known tech startup here that ended up selling to Alcatel, which is a multinational networking company. And he ended up getting, there were redundancies. They laid off a number of people when they bought Packet Engines. And so he, being the product manager of that group, ended up just continuing with consulting on a lot of their projects that they already had in the works. So SD81, Spokane School District, had a fiber ring that they were using Alcatel, using Packet Engines equipment for. And because he was the one that was the interface already with the school district, he continued that even after he left that group. And so his primary business was fiber rings, fiber networks. At the same time, that company was called Priority Terabit. He took the first letter of the first word and then the first four letters of the second word. Priority Terabit became Ptera. We still hear, the silent P, Terra, or Ptera, Ptera, but it's just it works out really well to have a 5-letter URL for us. We do have Ptera.com, and that was something I was able to require here not too long ago. And so we feel like we have a really, really cool startup story because it was kind of started up as a side thing. He had a primary business. There was an acute need at the time that he was able to solve.
So can you talk more about the inspiration for the business itself, the need that actually led to creating this? So where was the inspiration and how did he respond to it?
So at the time he lived in Liberty Lake. So we moved up, when we moved up here, we lived in Liberty Lake, and we had, at the time there was a cable provider in Liberty Lake that did not do internet. They only did TV. And so a lot of times with Comcast, you have internet and TV. Internet, actually, Comcast is the number one internet provider in the country now, more than they do TV. And in Liberty Lake, they didn't have that. They just had dial-up internet was all you could do. And so he was struggling with that, having come from Silicon Valley, and he ended up bringing in a couple of high-speed ISDN lines and then put an antenna on his roof, and he had some neighbors that all were complaining at the same time. He was able to just figure out the technology and repeat wireless connections to them as well. And at that time, I was actually involved in coming up with the distribution method, because we were both learning RF at the same time. And it was a fairly new thing at the time, and they didn't mass produce wireless cards. And so we actually tried to go our own direction and manufacture our own antennas. So I just in $12 at Home Depot, I was able to get enough parts to be able to put together an antenna that worked just as well as what you could buy, from any provider. But after a certain point, it was just easier to buy from established providers.
So this is kind of one of those classic startup stories where somebody needs to solve a problem for themselves,
Yep.
finds out that there's other people that need that problem solved too, and so solves it for them. At what point was the light bulb moment that said, this is a business?
So he ran it on the side and hired a couple people to take it over, kind of to grow it on the side while he was doing his fiber projects. And what happened was he took on several large fiber projects. The first ones being he put all the fiber network into the new CV and the new U-High that were built early 2000s. And so he was focused on that. And I actually worked for him, helping him with putting those networks in. On the side, the wireless was kind of running. And it was just every year they'd add a few customers here and there. By 2005, there was a competitor that was going out of business. And so he was able to acquire their customers. And all of a sudden now the revenue of this combined business was big enough that he thought, that's monthly recurring revenue. And it's now we've identified that there's enough need that could be its own standalone business. Because for at the beginning, he was having to work consulting jobs and work other jobs just to bring in enough money to keep the wireless side afloat. Because every time that you incremented a little more customers, you had to buy a little more infrastructure. And so it always seemed like it was chasing that break-even point. And so he got to the point finally when he absorbed those other customers to where okay, now it's actually making money. And so he started full-time in 2005. And at that time, I had started another business on the side. I was doing a retail business. And then I started a second business doing plastic injection molded parts. And so between those two businesses, I was too busy for working with my dad. And so he had basically started focusing purely on the wireless. It was very successful. He was able to, over the next 3 or 4 years, build it up to about 800 customers. And there was absolutely an acute need outside of town where it was a lot harder to get the infrastructure. All those customers really had available because they didn't have cellular data yet in 2007, 2008, 2009. They had to use satellite or dial-up. And we know those are, especially the way satellite was at the time, it was almost useless to be able to functionally use the internet through the satellite or through dial-up. So especially as websites and content got bigger and bigger, it just became useless to have a dial-up connection. So at that point, we were by far the best alternative outside of town. And so as we've grown, technology's advanced on the wireless side to the extent that now we have a competitive product even in town. And so where we end up finding most of our growth is on the commercial side, because there's a lot of businesses that they haven't quite balanced out with the residential market as far as what the price for what you get. There's residential packages because of because of competition have driven down to the point where it's affordable. With commercial, you're still paying 2 or 3 times as much sometimes for the same speed, where that's an area where we can come in and compete very well. And so we're now to the point where 25% of our revenue comes from commercial sources.
So there was kind of the tipping point where the business really took on a life of its own when there was the acquisition of
yes,
one
that was
competitor.
in 2005.
But can you talk a little bit about what he went through in terms of acquiring new customers, finding customers, growing the business at that stage? Because it kind of took on a life of its own, but still it was early in the growth process. So how did he go about reaching customers and bringing them in?
He kind of took on the philosophy of if you build it, they will come. And he knew that he had a competitive product, and the word of mouth was our number one way to grow and way to pass the word on. And I came on in 2009, and at that point they had already been very successful at taking some of that low hanging fruit where they Long Lake is a good example. 9 Mile Falls. That community banded together and said, we need something. They did the research and they found that we were available, and so they approached us and said, we really need you guys to come out here. Can you, we hear you guys have a good product. Can you come out and set us up? And so we ended up adding, 30% to our customer base just by going out and resolving that need that got there by word of mouth. And when I started, there are some parts of our business were so far behind. We had 3 employees and 800 customers, but our website was one single page, looked like a high school project. No offense to the guy that built it, but it didn't come across like a real professional business. And the plans looked like they'd been built by an engineer. Everything was you could tell it had all run by word of mouth before that. And so with a little bit of marketing, with a little bit of branding, we were able to spread the word even more. And it got to the point where we were growing 30% plus year over year, to the point where we are today.
So, and you and I work together on the advisory board at Eastern Washington University as well. So we get to talk a lot about student entrepreneurs and about aspiring entrepreneurs. But I find that a lot of student and aspiring entrepreneurs, when we're talking to them, one of the big things to get across is that idea of proof of concept. And it sounds like in the story of Ptera, really, that was one of the critical stages, because once you'd proven that this works, that you have a solution, then word of that solution got out, your market was able to find you. So, it was really that proving we really do have a better solution to the problem that's faced here.
And what was interesting, too, is that there were some other companies around the same time that we had started that they had similar offerings, but there were some core principles, core values that we had as a company, I think, that set us apart. When I started, we were the 4th largest company in this area that did what we do. So some other companies had started later and grown much faster and gotten to 2 or 3 times as big as we were. Because there was obviously a huge need for this product. What we ended up doing, though, was kind of the slow and steady organic growth, where we took care of our customers. We made sure that was the number one focus, and we feel like that was kind of a competitive advantage for us. In the internet industry, those companies, internet service providers, are not known for taking care of their customers very well. They know that every dollar they put into customer support doesn't come back because a lot of times they're the only game in town. We decided early on we were going to differentiate ourselves that way, and we ended up one by one taking over those competitors. And because of that customer focus and quality focus on the product, we ended up, and we are now the largest company that does what we do in the area.
So that's interesting, because it can take some real discipline to stay true to that focus and to those values and those commitments when there's so much incentive to take shortcuts.
Yeah.
And so, and yet that commitment, that discipline was really what led to the survival and growth of the company over the long run.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty powerful message, right?
Yeah,
there.
and it actually, a lot of that comes from my dad. So my dad, he recently passed. He had pancreatic cancer this last year and passed at the end of January. But I learned a lot from him. His philosophy was actually, that was an anti-profit, but it was more let's focus on what's really important, and then everything else will come. And so I think that there's a good lesson for me there in sticking to your core principles, deciding what your core principles are and your core values are, and then sticking to those, regardless of what comes up. We've been able to. We have a foundation named after a nephew that passed as a baby, and so we named a foundation after him that we provide service to people that need it, people, nonprofits that we can provide a benefit to. And so that was kind of my dad's pull, was to provide a connection, a value to the community, not necessarily to do what would make the most money. And I think that because we had that philosophy and we had those core values, that resonated with people, and that kind of allowed us to focus on making sure the product was good and that we were taking care of people first. And in a service industry, you have to do that. Otherwise, you have to have so much money that you can overcome that. And because we came from nothing, we came from no government funding, bootstrapping all of our own, growth ourselves. We had to have those values in place to be able to get to where we are now.
So that's a great transition to something I really wanted to get into for at least a couple of minutes today, because one of the biggest issues in entrepreneurship on a global basis is the transition to family business from one generation to the next. And you've recently taken over the company, becoming the second generation to run it. And I know you had some early experience with the company, but can you talk a little bit about that transition? And in particular, and I don't know what you've experienced with this, but a lot of times there's this tension between keeping the best of what came before me, but also kind of carving out that my own vision. So can you talk a little bit about that experience?
That's a really good question. I think that I've battled with that. I think that if I would have taken over maybe 5 or 10 years ago, I think that the direction would have changed fairly drastically. I have been involved in managing and running the company for the last 10 years. And now that we're over 30 employees, there's a big structure where we have to kind of reproduce ourselves and make sure that everyone gets that vision and everyone gets the core values that help make us successful. And so as we kind of transitioned, we started slowly. My dad wanted to be able to travel, for example, and so we started with being able to offload his main responsibilities to where he could go take 2 or 3 weeks and go to Spain and go to Tahiti and go to these places he'd always wanted to go spend time in. And so we started with kind of that slower transition. And I went to like the college of being like my dad for a while. There were a lot of really good things that he did that I was able to take and learn from over the years. And there were some things that maybe didn't help the company as much that I was able to say, okay, I don't need to take that on, but these are the things that will help us, and these are the things that have made us successful to this point, and we need to keep those around. And so there's a lot of my dad still imprinted on everything that we do, because he built it and because he and I worked together so closely for so long, that transition was facilitated to where now a lot of the things that we do are things that I can imagine him here working with us on, that I think he'd be very happy with some of the moves that we made lately, even though we're getting a little more aggressive in our growth and in the projects that we take on. For example, we have fiber to the home going into Cheney this year. By the end of the year, we expect to have 1,700 homes with fiber to the home in Cheney, which is a massive project for us, for a company our size. But I feel like we have the structure in place to be able to take on a project like that and do it successfully. So
my students have no more excuses for not being on.
Yeah, Cheney, it's one of the biggest complaints that I hear out there is the lack of a good internet connection. And so we're bringing in gigabit internet. The gigabit symmetrical internet is going to be $85 a month out there. So we're basically going 10 times the speed for half the price, more or less.
So one last thing that I really wanted to get into with you, just because it's been the theme of this last year, but how has COVID affected business, and how, I guess what I'm really trying to get at is how have you led the company in responding to that so that you carve out those opportunities where you see them within this experience?
Well, I think that the first thing that we've done is we have a really good core leadership team. Our group that we have a young, really sharp core of leaders that it makes things really easy for me because I can delegate a lot and elevate them to be able to make decisions and do what they need to do to make their group successful. So that's been a big success of ours. The other one is during COVID. Fortunately for our industry, people rely on the internet even more. They can't just get by with a shoddy internet connection at home when you have to work from home, when you have Zoom calls at home where you have to hop on to class from home. So our request for service actually doubled once COVID started, and continued all the way through. Our capacity to respond to those has been challenging because we've had to send people home. We completely shut down the office for the first 3 or 4 months of COVID, and then just took care of bare necessities, and that's it. And then we had this big pile of people that wanted service, and so we were able to just kind of chip away at that demand. And so, it really wasn't. It wasn't it's a good problem to have, let's say, because we had so much demand. The biggest problem we have is just finding and keeping good people. And so, it's a good problem again to have, but right now we're hiring as many people as we can get, because we have so much work to do. And, I feel like, we're really only limited right now by, kind of that bottleneck of bringing in and training really good people, because the more good people we can get in, we have plenty of stuff to do. We're turning away people right now. And so it's one of those things where it's a challenge from a business owner's perspective to be able to take all that demand and convert it into revenue, convert it into customers. But we're doing it responsibly, and we're focusing on those areas where we can have the biggest return long term. So
navigating growth and hiring and all of that could be an entirely separate episode.
Yeah, it's been forefront for us, just because, for me especially, that's what I've been focused on. I've done every job at the company, and I've gone from, focusing with my head down in the trenches to now I have to take a step back and learn how to be a manager, and I have to learn how to motivate people, learn how to get the best out of people, and that's something that's been challenging for me, to be honest. And it's something that I've improved at, but I have a lot of room still to improve. So,
well, certainly a lot of great information, a lot of great tips in there. Unfortunately, we're at the end of time for the episode. Can you tell people, how do they learn more about Ptera? Where do they find information? How do they connect with the company if they're interested?
So we just built a new website. It's something that we're constantly trying to improve, but I really am proud of this new website we built here last month.
So not the high school one.
No, it's well, we did it internally. So it's funny that we've paid people to do our websites before, and we actually have a couple people internally. One person in particular that he can just learn anything. And so in a couple of nights of studying, he was able to do stuff that we've never been able to get done before. One of those things is that you can just put in your address, and it'll tell you what plans you qualify for. It'll tell you if you live in a construction zone in Cheney that's going to have fiber next month, so that you can sign up. We had 30% of our homes already sold before we even started, adding new customers on fiber because of this website. So, at www.ptera.com, you can put in your address and see what plans you have available, if they're wireless or fiber plans. And, we're just another way to deliver the internet. There's cable, there's DSL, there's wireless, and there's fiber, and we've got those last two. So.
Well, fantastic. Well, Steve, it's been a pleasure working with you for so many years and knowing you for so many years.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for joining me on the show today. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Startup Stories, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
You're listening to the music of 68-year-old Spokane singer-songwriter Tim Brummett.
I was 10 years old when I wrote the first song.
Tim's new 5-song EP is available on iTunes, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, and many more sites.
They were dancing and smiling.
Tim and his music is a success story for Spokane, and we want Spokane to hear hometown boy Tim's music.
At the table, as if the sun.
Need replacement windows? Call 1-800-NEXT-WINDOW. Window World. Simply the best for less.